think everybody's on vacation.
What's the
Or maybe it's everyone's watching it online.
You know, it's an option. It's like, it's not the go-to. Do you think the conference is going to, every time it keeps coming out, do you think they're going to start pushing it for that?
Well, did Erickson come back to you with a better deal for CIA, or did they just they couldn't do anything because of the CIA? I mean, you can't try I was wondering how much flexibility he would have. Hey, with that, I do think he doesn't get a better representation.
If race randomly distributed high variability, but like a visual staging and fluid.
Okay, we're almost ready to start. Sparser crowd too, boy. This is the nice day, it's almost summer. I've already finished my summer vacation. It is summer. Downhill from here. Isn't that actually the start of the summer? Longest day of the year is actually downhill. The days are getting shorter. I know. I'm practicing. Okay, this is for the. Is it too loud back there? Okay. So this is where to coordinate the video. No, thank you. We are broadcasting live and we'll have the edited version of it with better screenshots later. But 1, 2, 3. Okay. Someday I'm going to get one of those clappers that movies use. But otherwise, if you don't do that, then you get, I'm talking. So, okay, thank you for coming. Sorry about the late cancellation last month, but I was flat on my back with a pinched nerve, which is so much better now. But it's amazing how bad very old can be. Older. Yes, it's not just old, it's even older. And even older now. So first, I would want to welcome a new member of our advisory committee, Linda Siegel. It would have been last month, but and we're really appreciative of having new blood. And
Older all the time.
So Linda, this is this group. And you have been here before. Linda has sat in on some, so she knew what she was getting into. But kind of my expectations is that we have vocal and opinionated people, not only sitting at the table, but in the audience. That's my hope. I live for that. Because boring advisory committee meetings are boring. And the whole point is for you to tell us what you think and help advise us. So, two things as we start. First, Linda, if you could just give some, a little background on who you are, where you're coming from. And then if we could quickly go around the room just so you get a sense of who everybody else is. And we don't usually do that, but because we've all been here a lot before. But it's good every once in a while just to remind people of who everybody is and what we're doing.
Thank you very much. I'm Linda Siegel. I live in Wayland. I've lived for 40 years. If you look at the website, you'll see that I'm in the slot of advocacy site neighbors because 25 years ago, as a public school teacher, suddenly found myself living in a neighborhood that had to deal with cleaning up a hazardous waste site. So that's where I come from. But in the process, got involved also in municipal government and helped with the cleanup of 2 major hazardous waste sites in our town. And then just coming to meetings and learning a lot. One thing I said to Paul and Liz was that for me it's a never-ending learning curve. But coming to some of these kinds of meetings, the positive karma in the room and the energy and just how much you focus and we all are committed to very similar goals, it just felt like a good fit and I was willing to try it. So thanks very much.
Welcome.
Welcome. Yes.
And then we can go around this way.
I'm Susan Chapman. I believe, do you have a list there? Yes. I believe I represent the public. That's what I've been trying to do. Let's see, Susan Chapman, Public Interest Environmental. Look at that. All right, I have my own consulting firm, New Environmental Horizons. I'm an environmental chemist. I've been in the business 25 plus years. I work a lot with the LSPs and the DEP. I also am on the Arlington Conservation Commission. I live in Arlington, so getting into wetland regulations, which is a lot of fun and very interesting. And I do try to put out pieces locally in Arlington on environmental issues that are happening, so I'm trying to wear my advocacy hat that way. And those of you who come to the meetings a lot will know that I was a bit of a bulldog on the TCE issue when EPA lowered the exposure thresholds, so helped to get that going indeed.
Question Paul chagrin.
Not to my chagrin. Okay, Wendy.
Okay, all right.
We'll do the table.
Okay. I'm Wendy Heiger Bernays, and I am I'm sitting in the academia seat. You never know which seat in which I sit. Yes, I think I was on maybe the first risk assessment guidance development under the new system years and years ago. I represent the academic community. I'm an environmental toxicologist by training, and I try to support the latest and greatest science in this age of no science, and currently working on a number of hazardous waste situations, Bedford, which goes on and on and on, and many, many others. I also try to bring this work back to students, to engage them in the work that you guys do and in the work of protecting health and the environment. On my night job is I'm the chair of the Board of Health of my town's Board of Health, and I'm very passionate about protecting health and the environment, and I too push back and will continue to do so.
We should ask, who doesn't push back? We're pushing one way.
I'm Ned Abelson. I'm an environmental lawyer with Poolsmith Stores in Boston. I've been working there since '83. I work with commercial real estate developers, which is the seat in which I sit, and I don't even look at the chart to know that. I've worked with all the different versions of the MCP, helping developers figure out the efficient pathway through the regs as they redevelop sites and clean them up. And I wrote my first letter to the president a couple of weekends ago about pulling out of Paris.
For you.
I'm still waiting on the call.
No, now you'll get on the email list for the White House. Wait till you see all the
Probably on the no-fly.
Yeah, exactly. I'm Eileen Gladstone. I am with GEI Consultants, and I represent ACDC, so I'm representing the consulting engineering community. I'm also an LSP, and I've been an LSP since the initiation of the program. I have a general waste site cleanup practice from development of contaminated properties, do a lot of vapor intrusion work, PCB cleanup, a mixture of both public and private sector clients. And I, for, I don't know, 25 years have been the vocal in the ass.
That's the seat she holds.
Next. Hi, I'm Michelle O'Brien. I'm an environmental lawyer at Pierce Atwood in the Boston office. I've been on the advisory committee for some time now, and I sit in the role of PRP attorney liaison or seat or whatever we call this. And in the interest of time, I'm passing it over to Michelle.
All right. I'm Michelle Paul. I'm an LSP. I represent the municipal officials. I'm the City of New Bedford's Director of Resilience and Environmental Stewardship, which I don't have to write all the time. And I am trying to make the environmental issues in New Bedford not go on and on and on. We've got plenty of them. We've got a couple of Superfund sites. We've got cleanup sites that we're the PRP. We've got cleanup sites that we're the owner and other people in the PRP. Having come from Brownfield and private practice, I've basically seen everything, and we're on just about every side of the table.
And I'll make this short as well. Marty Hilfinger, I'm with Cumberland Farms, and I'm representing, and I have to look at the acronym each time because it's rather long now. It used to be IOMA, but it's I'm actually small business, but I'm with also the New England Convenience Store and Energy Marketers Division. I'm an LSP and a PG, and I work for Cumberland Farms.
Okay, and in the interest of meeting my 9:30 deadline, but for everybody else, and first, I always appreciate that we have usually have a much larger, a substantial and not shy audience participation, so that the lead line between the people sitting at the table and the people sitting at the audience shouldn't be blurry, and their opinions are as welcome as everybody else. But we're not going to go through the individual introductions for everybody else. But if you could give a raise of hands so that we get a general feeling, and you can raise your hand multiple times because these categories are overlapping. LSPs and environmental consultants. People with municipal interests. People that would view yourselves as environmental advocates. State employees, or particularly DEP employees, not generally state employees, there you go. Any other good categories we can do? Academics, risk assessors, there we go, okay. Chemists, geologists, there we go. And like I said, multiple. Anybody else? Attorneys. Usually, we have better representation for attorneys. Where is everybody?
LSP Association.
LSP Association. Good.
Board members of the LSP Association.
Or
former board members.
That outfit on a lot. Okay, so Linda, the point I'm trying to make is we do have a very broad-based, hopefully, and active group, which we really appreciate and we welcome you to the fold. So I'm going to move on to our TC sites. Well, first, let's try to do it in a little bit of order. Budget. As you know, our state budget is working its way through the system, as is the federal budget. And I've had several meetings with EPA and seen meetings here, and consistently across the board, the message is take a deep breath and wait and see what is going to happen at both levels. This is a period of time where it's out of our hands. We are very interested in seeing the state budget.
You should reach your destination by 10:07 a.m.
You've reached your destination.
7 minutes.
The state budget is looking, relatively good relative to past years, but there are concerns about ongoing revenue projections and people are watching that closely. And that will have an effect on kind of what happens in the budget process. Yes.
How much of the marijuana tax is going to be paid?
The extra 14.
Yeah, if it goes anywhere, it'll go to DPA. Yeah, we don't get a cut of that. That whole thing is not going to benefit us at all. So there's that, and then the federal budget, but as we talked about the last time in March, we do get a substantial amount of money through grants through the federal government. Wayside cleanup does, DEP even broader gets a lot of money, particularly those programs that delegated where we are implementing the federal program, like the water and air programs. So we are very dependent upon it. So there will be a lot more to come, but in the meantime, we're taking a deep breath, we're relaxing, we're letting the people who worry about that, and we'll go on vacation. And when we come back, we'll know more. The TCE sites, and yes?
Relative to the budget and proposals for DP to take over the MPDS program,
Yes.
is that the same?
With the budget and the proposal for DEP to take over the NIPTES program, to seek delegation for the NIPTES program, I believe the last I heard it has not passed the legislature, so it would be predicated upon the legislature, those people passing a bill that would allow us to do that and would fund a certain number of staff to give us the ability to do that. So until that happens, we're not going to move big head on it. And this is all very broad, general. I'm not directly involved. We would be here to do the program. So we're waiting for that sequence of events. It has not yet passed. Okay. PC sites and PFAS sites are continuing moving ahead. There's really not a huge amount to report on specific site-specific stuff. The regions are dedicating a significant amount of staff, particularly the Northeast region, but all the other regions have kind of a similar level or prorated number of sites that they are working on. So Susan, we put this on because we knew you were going to ask anyway, and that continues to be a priority among all our other priorities, and that's one of the issues that I keep emphasizing, that we have a lot of balls in the air, and TC is one of them, and we are assigning and methodically kind of looking at those sites and reviewing those sites, and my impression from speaking with the staff, the DRDs, is that the work is progressing really well, and the private sector, as we make contact and as we work on these sites, have been kind of very cooperative, and the work is going really well. So happily so. Yeah, not wood.
Do you think in the fall meeting we could get a real update on, sites and things like that have?
Yeah, what may be good would be to have one of the DRDs or the site managers come in and talk about specific sites and some of the issues that they are dealing with. Similar to what John did a while ago on the Newton site. And we could have him come back and try to get him to come back and update us on that, or choose another site, because there are a number of very interesting sites out there, and there are a lot of different flavors of how these sites are playing out, which is maybe the updates kind of they're hard to categorize because there are 15. It's like there's whatever the Baskin Robbins flavor. They're all playing out very uniquely. So, and PFAS, we're working on a lot of sites. We're doing the kind of interesting thing for PFAS is out in the western region, where they had in Westfield had a hit public water supply well of PFAS, and that well was taken offline. DEP is now doing sampling in private wells, kind of working out from there to see the extent of that and see what we're finding. So we're beginning to get preliminary results in now from that. So we'll have more to report back on that. But we are seeing contamination. We are doing, where necessary, we're doing follow-up from that.
And you're testing for what?
Generally, I believe we're testing, Mark is here, so what we're doing is the EPA method, and so it's 14 compounds there. So yeah, Mark will be here. The other non-site stuff, I have 5 minutes, that I wanted to throw out there and let you know about and kind of warn you about both. This is the opportunity problem, so to say. A couple things. One, DEP is going to be, well, not DEP. The state of Massachusetts is going to be revising its website. Ours included. And
I know it can't be improved upon, but.
I know. We thought we had it perfected. And I always hesitate to do this. We've done this several times, and every time, we think, oh God, we're going to ruin it, and then we get used to what we have, and we like it, and then we get afraid when we're going to change it again. And this is an ever-evolving process, and it's two things. One, using the system we have now actually collects a lot more data, analytical stuff that they can then evaluate and figure out what people are doing, what they're looking for, how much time they spend on things, blah, blah, blah. And then can make informed decisions about kind of how to improve the website. So hopefully that's playing into it. And then there's a certain technology aspect. As technology improves, particularly to what's available to the state, we can do more and better things. So the way that I am seeing this, and it's still probably not going to be implemented until later this year, and we may be coming to you for opinions and for more direct help and kind of what you want to see and how to present things. But the goal is to make sure that people can get, our consumers, our users, our customers, if you will, that's the way they view all of you, can get to the information that you need in as few clicks as possible. So they are looking at what are the most common, most popular things, and how do you elevate that to make them quickly available and provide the services that you want, that you need, that you require for your work or as citizens of Massachusetts in the quickest possible way. So for waste site cleanup, I think that there will be certain things that are going to be very emphasized. One will be emergency response. You need to call us and tell us about something. That has to be there. Another thing is going to be the site file viewer and site information. That has to be there, and you have to get that really quickly. Another thing will be like things like forms and the submittals that you need. So the emphasis statewide is to provide those services. So that's one thing. The other cool thing with the technology.
Also, something that's really important is easy access to e-filing, particularly PRPs who don't use it on a regular basis. So it can't be there.
Right, keep that in mind for a second, because that's actually a separate thing I need to talk about. But the other thing, part of the website, is what they are providing us, and this is going to be new, is going to be a better way of managing documents. And in the back end, kind of behind the scenes, there will be two different systems, which you should not, if I wasn't telling you now, you probably wouldn't notice. But there's going to be a new document manager that they're going to be putting into effect, which will give us the ability to curate and manage collections of documents, kind of group them together in different ways, which will give us a lot more flexibility and should help find things better, because there will be multiple ways of kind of finding them. And this is different from what we have now, it can be better used as an archive for old material, for a variety of reasons you don't need to know, but for things like having all of the different versions of the MCP available. They're not up now because we have very concerns about somebody Googling it and kind of dropping into the 1997 version, thinking that's the current version, and using it. We'll have better control of that, and we'll be able to make things like that available. So that whole process should work, and there will be a lot of disruption. Probably between September and December is the current schedule for creating disruption. But in the end, after December, I think the end result should be quicker, more efficient, and it will be easier to find things. I'm told that is their goal, and they have real professional IT professionals doing this. So,
Since you just mentioned it, I've been thinking about this. It would be great if, as part of that document management, that there were archived public comment drafts of guidance as well as previous versions of the MCP, because when sites are audited that had been done, you know, sometimes a decade ago, when maybe all that was available was a public comment draft or some kind of interim document, you know, by which the LSP had to, you know, go by.
Draft, not for official use.
Yeah,
well,
right, but
this document manager,
As a reference.
I am told, and all of this can change as we move along, but it should give us the ability, and the word that they use is curate,
yeah.
to manage and curate those so that we can control kind of how they're viewed to the access and how it's viewed, and kind of control that. What we fear most is people dropping in and thinking it's the most current. That can be controlled, which means we can package them in ways that will allow access, but informed access within a context. So we're hoping that we'll be able to do that.
Two things. One, I agree with the list of priorities that you rattled off, and the one I would add to it is availability of policy documents as well. And the second thing, more important, is I am no techno wizard at all. At my place, the biggest problem we have with the IT whizzes who theoretically work for us is at times they seem not to have a clue how our business works. And therefore, while they may be really good with the computer, what they're doing doesn't do us any good. And so my suggestion is that the most important point to make to the IT folks with whom you're working is that they learn how your business and our collective business works.
You got that, right? And that's, we believe that, and that's very important. My two comments on that. One is this is mass IT. So we are not under the impression that they, in fact, work for us. Not even close. They are separate, statewide, Commonwealth-wide, and DP is one fish in this pond. And so to your second point, do they understand our business? We're working on that. Because it's statewide, and this is one of the things that we're struggling with. And they are very thoughtful, and they are being very flexible and very understanding in this process. But they're beginning their first cut at what do citizens of the Commonwealth want out of the Commonwealth's website. You can imagine that access to EDP forms is pretty low on that list. And they have, you know, so the things that immediately come to mind, even in the environmental agencies, are how do I get a hunting license or a fishing license? It's, you know, and those are the services that a lot of people want. And we are, you know, sadly, we are kind of a tier down. And they understand that, and they appreciate it, and they understand that that doesn't make our work less important. But it's not the first thing that they think about. So and they're being very good. They have templates which don't fit what we do, and they are being very good about adjusting and modifying and adding templates which are more appropriate for us. But that's something we're starting on. One more, and then I have a couple.
As an LSP, the one thing that drives me absolutely bonkers is when I put together a large report that may be more than 40 megabytes, trying to upload that, you have to break it up. That is a real problem. It's a time problem. It's a logistical problem. Is that going to be addressed?
Yes, but not in the way you're probably thinking. So if I can move on, and if you still have a question, we'll get to it. So the other piece that I wanted to talk about is that you may have noticed if you're working in the air, kind of with air permits or some of the water permits, that DEP has fairly quietly implemented a new online permit program. And this is the beginning of something we were talking about in the past. I warned you about it, would be coming in the future, what we call IPASS. I have no memory of what that acronym stands for now. But we're beginning to see the first round started out with a very soft, very quiet release in March, and it seems to be working fairly well. I believe at the end of this week we may be sliding out some more, again, water and air related permits, some of the small ones, just to test the water to make sure that it's all working. But these are the first steps to the bigger data system revamping that will replace EDP. So my point being, right now, you think of the problem you just described as we need more megabytes, we need to be able to upload bigger documents. That's not the solution. The solution that will come will be, we are going to have a different system that will be taking in information and presenting information in a completely different and hopefully, well, no, definitely better way. So we're on the trailing end of this, which has its good points and bad points. They're practicing on the air program and water programs, and by the time they get to us, they're going to have this down and know exactly what they're doing and be able to do it quickly. And that was partly because we were already ahead of people having online submittals and online retrieval of documents. So part of what they're doing is bringing the other programs up to kind of where we were and going beyond, and then we'll follow in and do the and beyond part. So that is coming, and that will be addressed. File size and things like that will be addressed as part of that process. And you're going to be you are going to be seeing, or you are seeing now, the results of that process in the other programs. So that's really heartening. And there'll be, once we're sure that it's really working, there'll be a bigger discussion, announcement, and celebration of this. So don't really make a big deal of it right now. This is not an official announcement. The other thing that should be coming very, very shortly is you will have access in the public, and this is really exciting, we'll have access to what I've heard described as a data lake. New terminology. So the DEP programs are beginning to throw data into this lake, into the data lake. It's a public portal for, like I said, the water programs dealing with it. And so part of the goal of IPASS in this revamping of the data systems was not only for the regulated entities to be able to submit documents and apply for permits online, but it was also to make information available to the public. What we do with our site file viewer and those documents is a first step childish version of that. The data lake and the way to manipulate the data and view data across towns or across programs, across permit categories, across facilities. You'll be able to pick and choose and combine different ways of viewing the data. It's really cool. And it's coming as soon as next week. You know how these things are, but it's going to be measured in terms of days, and perhaps weeks rather than even months. And the first programs that will have information in the data lake will be some of the water permits and the air permits, and I think some compliance and enforcement information as well. And then we'll be moving, and we'll be kind of adding things as they get more information, and eventually our site file viewer won't entirely go away, but that all of that will be brought into it, so you could pull up in this public data portal a particular town. Let's pick on Susan. You can pick on Arlington, and And not only will you be able to look at the 21 East sites that are in Arlington, but facilities with different permits and enforcement actions that happen there. And you'll be able to do it geographically, you'll be able to do it by address, search in different ways across programs. And that's going to be really cool. And again, that's going to be very, very soon. The initial parts will have a limited amount of data, but it's going to be built out fairly quickly.
Who's deciding the fields by which people will be able to search? And is there the potential for input on that?
The question is, who is deciding fields and is there potential for input on that? Well, there's always potential for input. From what
Meaningful.
Frankly, it's a variety of different things. And so your input will be welcome, but kind of the two big things that you have to think about, or that we are thinking about, that we're in our getting people input, is one, this is all built around particular software that we've purchased or licensed, whatever we've done with it. So it's what are we able to build into it, and what are those technical limitations? And two is, what data do we have, and how can one include it? So there are those kind of limitations. You can't search on things where we don't collect the data, or at this stage of the game, where the data is difficult or impossible to transfer over into the new system. So we may have it in some of our ePrivate data systems, but the new system might be fraught. The problem, we're also looking at the data to make sure it is clean enough and correct enough to present or to use. So that's another thing. What is the quality of that data, and how confident are we in that? We want to have some confidence in the data that we put out there. So there are things like that, and then there are more qualitative questions, I guess, about what, if it meets all of those criteria, is it something that would be useful to have up there, because there is only limited screen space. So there's this balance of making it useful versus overwhelming. If it's something that 1% of the people coming there might be interested in, but it's going to make it more complicated, then again, going back to MassIT's interest in making sure that the whole website is useful and really serving, there, it's really back to the 80-20 rule. They're pretty much using the same rule. They're aiming for the 80% and satisfying the 80% of people, giving them what they want. Because going for that last 20% and making the last 20% happy makes it a lot more complicated, a lot more expensive, a lot more cluttered, something like that. So your input would be welcome, and it would be meaningful, but it would be one of many factors of the subject.
You're saying this data lake for some information is going to be live very shortly.
Very shortly.
Is that going to be through the current DEP website or through a different?
There will be links from the current DEP website. Because we want to people there. The people who have been working on this are rightly very proud and excited about it. I have been working on this. Our information isn't there yet, and I'm still excited. It is really, really, really cool. And it's something that I think, as citizens of the Commonwealth, it's a long time coming. You see this in other places that, and we should have it, and we're going to have it.
If this is a Commonwealth, are other organizations, other DPH, for example, going to be able to merge?
So the question is, if this is the Commonwealth, so I will draw a couple lines here, and I have been talking about a couple different things. The MassIT, the entire Commonwealth, the websites are all going to be redone all together. We're all going to go, and that is Commonwealth-wide. The document manager is going to be Commonwealth-wide. But the work on iPass, which the data lake is within the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. So there will be overlap of other agencies, and we're all kind of doing the same thing, and where it's perfect, it will be merged, but it's within the Executive Office. We're hoping that this will be kind of a model, and other people will see what we do, partly because that kind of justifies the money that we're spending on it. and would make things consistent, but that part is within the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. One more, and then Liz is going to...
Geolocation, GIS of environmental data, right, you know, so that you can go in and say, hey, where were all those? And oh, look at all this data around me. And
Geolocation of environmental data.
Catch up with New York.
Yes, yes, and that's part, so to put it, you know, which boxes is fitting in, IPASS, the EEA redoing of DEPs and the other EA agencies, that's part of that. We'll see. We haven't jumped into that yet, but certainly geolocation of information, and more importantly, the being able to take in data electronically, so that you can do that sort of thing is part of that. We're on the verge of something really, really, really good. Mark. Mark Smith from our Office of Research and Standards.
All right, so we're going to switch here and talk a little bit of science, but it's going to be relatively simplified. Folks in the back can hear with this. Okay, excellent. All right, so today I'm not going to be talking so much about the specific toxicology, which I think is what is on the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that we're developing pertaining to what the tests are, and then how to use that data in a meaningful way to evaluate and assess some of the risks for this fairly large group of compounds. All right, so in the draft PFAS sampling guidance, which I think many of you perhaps have provided some input and review, we got some feedback that included a number of comments related to what do we test for, just PFOA and PFOS, where we have the most data, or how far do we go beyond that? The second question is, if we do go beyond that, well then, what do we do with the data that we get, since we don't have an RFD or a health advisory for drinking water, right now for anything beyond PFOA and PFOS. So a few of the approaches that have been used by other states, by EPA, other federal agencies right now, have been either just focused sampling and analysis and testing on PFOA and PFOS, and that's it, at least in terms of the reporting of the data. And that's because there's an RFD and a health advisory, so we know what to do with the data. We've got some way and some mechanism of evaluating. Second approach, actually jump down to the third one here, is just to focus on the UCMR3 analytes. And UCMR, the acronym is the Unregulated Chemical Monitoring Rules. And this is the drinking water program, federal EPA requirement to test for compounds that we don't have standards for. And six of the compounds, we got a pointer. The UCMR 3 protocol included 6 of the perfluorinated compounds, and we'll get to a quick preview, a chart with a bunch of these compounds on it. So in this case, 4 of them do not have RFD or health advisory information. It includes PFOS and PFOA, but I'll note, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, that 3 of the 4 are very similar in terms of structure or activity and toxicological information in PFOS and PFOA. Another approach is to look and to analyze for the full suite of compounds under the EPA 537 methodology, and that's 14 the compounds. So obviously there's 12 there that lack RFD or health advisory information. That suite of compounds includes all of the 6 that were included in the UCMR3 analysis for drinking water, that national program, and of course it includes PFOS and PFOA. Other states and other agencies have done other things. New Hampshire right now is recommending a total of 9, which includes some overlap with the 537 analytes, but a couple of compounds that aren't part of the analytes specified there. And then the military and in some of the preliminary work in New Hampshire, they were testing somewhere between 20 and 24 compounds using labs doing isotopic dilution methods, and you can actually probably now do well over 30 plus compounds. And of course, there are other approaches for totaling all of the compounds, perfluorinated compounds as well. The standard methodologies in terms of those that really have approved methods from EPA is the 537 method and the subsets that are included there. All right, so here's a complicated chart, and we don't need to worry about reading all the details of the name. This is 16 different perfluorinated compounds, and if we come over here, we've got the EPA 537 analytes, so that's 14 of them. The UCMR3 analytes indicated with next, 6 of them. The New Hampshire analytes, which has 9, and as you can see, it includes a couple that are not part of the EPA 537 methodology. The derivation of the 9 for New Hampshire was based on the more extensive initial analysis that they did, and these were the ones that showed up in their broader data set. And then we'll get to the Connecticut policy in a moment. So these are all organized by carbon chain length, and there's some relationships between toxicity information and basically the persistence in the environment and in the body based on chain length. PFOA and PFOS are indicated in red. Those are the two that we have the RFD information for from EPA. What Connecticut has done is they've issued the Connecticut Department of Public Health and Policy, basically recommending that 5 of the 6 UCMR3 analytes, all of the longer chain ones, be included in the sum to compare to the health advisory, EPA 70 parts per trillion health advisory for drinking water. So in essence, that means adopting and using the RFD or PFOA and PFOS, which is the same, and applying it to the other 3 chemicals as well. They did not include the short chain one, which is included here. That's PFBS. And we'll get on the next chart some discussion of why that wasn't included. I'll note that I think there's only one state that I'm aware of, which is Minnesota, that has the guidance value for the shorter chain, 4 carbon chain compounds, and it's 7,000, so 2 orders of magnitude greater than that would be the drinking water health advisory, 2 orders of magnitude greater than the EPA health advisory for PFOS and PFOA. All right, so a little more detail. We've looked at some of the information that Connecticut provided and some additional information. This summarizes a lot of data on toxicology and persistence. If we look at the UCMR3 compounds, that's 6 of them. Keeps me alert. We have one column for in vivo toxicities, that's basically animal test data, mostly rats and mice. In vitro toxicity data, in this case, this is mostly cell cytotoxicity data from cell culture systems. You can see on half-life information, and this is from people, so the estimates and they're pretty broad ranges. These are sort of the values that's available. If we look at PFOA, well, first of all, if you look at the structures, which may be a little hard to see here, but we have 2 different functional groups at the end, carboxylic acid groups, and you can't see the yellow is the sulfur. That's a sulfuric acid functional group. It doesn't, take a sophisticated toxicologist or rocket scientist to see that they look at these pretty similar compounds, both in terms of chain length and functional group and charge distribution. Fairly close. So when we get down to the shorter ones, you can see, they're a lot shorter. There's some differences with the shorter carbon chain. So just looking at these things at first glance, you can see that there are a lot of similarities in the structures. And that actually is reflected in the available toxicity. So if you look at PFOS and PFOA and ranking of everything here compared to PFOA, what we see is the in vivo and in vitro toxicity for all of the long chain compounds are all close. And if you look at the persistence data where we have it, 3 of the compounds, they're relatively close as well, and actually the shorter chain compound, PFHXS, has actually got a longer. This is probably a significant difference, although again, there's quite a bit of variability in half-life measurements. When we get down to the short chain, carbon length 4 here, which was included in UCMR3, the toxicity is quite a bit different, and the half-life, short half-life, is dramatically shorter. And this explains why the movement right now in terms of production and use of these types of fluorinated chemicals is towards the shorter chain derivatives. There's a lot of emerging toxicity information on the shorter chain derivatives with different toxicity endpoints, not to say that they're safe, but I think there's quite a bit of evidence that they are less persistent. All right, so that basically leads us to what we're currently recommending. So back to this list here. We're recommending for DEP, or for the drinking water program, this cleanup program, that we really encourage folks to test for all 14 of the DEP at 537 analytes. We'd like to get some occurrence data in Massachusetts to see which ones are showing up here. So as a start, we'd certainly like to see data testing for all of them. If you have a site with a compound that you suspect may have been used or may have been involved in a release that's not on the list, that should be pursued as well. And for many of these compounds, labs can develop or have developed techniques using isotopic dilution methods to test for things beyond this list. This is a good starting point. In terms of handling the data, again, we're quite comfortable with the Connecticut policy recommendation, and we've done some additional work that I think supports that. And we would recommend summing all 5 of those compounds and compare them to the health advisory, basically using and applying the RFD for PFOS and PFOA to those as well. So that's basically what we're recommending, and we're sort of looking for feedback and comments from folks to see what you all think. Questions?
So I think I just heard you say the recommendation is similar to Connecticut in terms of summing the 5.
Yep.
And as far as analyses to do on PFAS sites, do the 14 compounds in the 537 method?
That's correct. With the addition, if you think you have, or you know you have some other compound that goes beyond that list, do not just ignore it, to really look for that as well. Okay.
I guess my question is we know these compounds are in a lot of consumer products and AFFF and so forth, but not all 14 are necessarily associated with. There's some specificity in how they were used. Mm-hmm. So if you define a site as a PFAS site, it may be really a couple of those compounds that are really significant to AFFF and the others aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, occurrence in getting that data is useful from a sort of public policy perspective, but is that too wide a net for certain issues, certain releases?
And the answer is yes, it probably is too wide a net for some releases, although the firefighting foams often have a mixture of compounds, certainly will not be fossil control. And I think if you're dealing with a specific site, then you know that there's only 1 or 2 of the compounds that will be used. The case could be made for this focus on the labs. However, when the labs do the analysis, even some of the ECMR3 analyses that were done include more some compounds, because that's just the methods that the labs
So I guess the correlate questions are, so if you're analyzing for much wider array of constituents than potentially maybe are even associated with release, and for which there's no toxicity information available, what are we supposed to do with that information?
All right, so let me jump in on that. It's not that there's no toxicity information available. There's no RFD that could...
There's no peer-reviewed consensus documented toxicity.
Yes, but there is toxicity information that's available in the literature. And if you do find some of these longer chain ones, rather than ignore them and assume that there's no toxicity, we really recommend taking a deeper dive that we've done today to look at the information that is out there, in particular on the in vitro toxicology literature, to see if we can come up with a meaningful 2-type standard to evaluate the toxicity.
So go to various literature sources, not necessarily described in the hierarchy of toxicity sources and the regulations. And,
right.
I mean, so going way perhaps beyond. So I guess I just, that sounds very problematic to me, and that it's going to, you could have different people coming up with different toxicity values and reaching different conclusions, and how would you even necessarily be able to know if that's appropriate and if it's not, regulated? I guess I think the level of uncertainty that we're getting into by going down that path is problematic. And so if you take what DEP decided with homegrown produce, for example, using BMPs instead of requiring quantitative evaluation because the level of uncertainty and the fact that it ended up driving risk, but with so many layers of uncertainty and conservatism built in at sites and preventing closure, I'm worried that this is going to turn into the same snowball, and I'm not sure what the value added necessarily is.
All right, so let me just say the value added is that in vitro toxicity data, which have the longer chain compounds, and the persistence in the environment, and persistence in the human body are all considerably worse because of factors of 4 and 6. The data is much more limited. It's clearly just in vitro data, which you have to extrapolate from. But basically, to ignore them at this point, to me, makes absolutely no sense at all. So we're certainly interested in other approaches that would get us to a point where we would actually be addressing those compounds rather than just kind of pretending that they don't have any toxicity in the environment. I'm certainly open to suggestions. I do understand your concern, but the reality is there's like 3,000 of these 3,000 plus fluorinated compounds that are out there, and we're still only looking at a pretty limited suite right now. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I do. So a couple of things I think in addressing your comment is that we are looking at chemicals that are unregulated, right? And so we're looking at thousands of these things. National Toxicology Program, in conjunction with National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, is releasing, can't hear, on screen? So the National Toxicology Program, in conjunction with the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, is releasing a large study intended to be released, I think, at the end of the summer, probably a little bit later than that does take a look at some of the non-PFOA, non-PFOS PFASs. I think the data that are accumulating, both from the in vitro studies, which are available, and some of the in vivo studies do point to the effects of these chemicals as being significant in terms of developmental toxicity, not something to be walked away from. The fact that we don't have good in vivo 2-year animal bioassay studies speaks to the fact that we can't get funding to do the studies unless we demonstrate the presence of these things in the environment and the importance of studying these things. So it's sort of a circular argument. And I think in this case, because we do have good now epidemiological data pointing to the group of PFASs beyond PFOA and PFOS as having effects that are significant on thyroid, on brain development, on behavior, warrant a closer look so that the scientists can actually get at the question you're really targeting, which is what are the numbers we use, right? And so I do think that we've done this before with other groups of chemicals, where we've said adopt a value and extrapolate, right? I mean, we're still looking at PAHs, right? It's a long time. But I think that these are chemicals, because they lack regulation, we're at the tip of the iceberg, right? And we need those data, and I think a combination of in vitro and in vivo and epidemiological data point to the problematic nature of these chemicals.
All right, thank you. Mark, given all the toxicology,
Yes.
one of the problems, I think the number one problem we face is collecting representative environmental samples. Beyond that, I think our clients reasonably ask the question of,
is this really a problem from the environmental source? I mean, if we think about, my small grandchild, hypothetically, who is crawling on the PFAS-coated carpet and PFAS-coated furniture, lives in a house that is filled with this, rides in a car filled with this, but may come into contact with part per trillion concentrations in soil, possibly compared to maybe part per million concentrations, constantly in their living environment. There's a lot of question about the utility of what we're doing.
Yeah, right. It's a good question, and the answer to that really is probably the soil exposure pathways in and of themselves are likely to not be significant, but the drinking water pathway certainly can be. And if you look at the pharmacokinetic extrapolations from exposures at and around the EPA health advisory, then that drinking water pathway becomes a predominant and significant source of overall exposure to individuals who are drinking that water. So it is significant from that standpoint.
So again, that's what I'm trying to say. So in the environmental samples, we have air, water, and soil, just sort of broadly. Our focus is primarily on drinking water?
It's primarily drinking water from the standpoint of significant exposures. Air, again, indoor air, because of particulates coming off all the stuff you just listed, is a significant source of exposure. It's not something that we're addressing. So it's beyond our regulatory rights. Beyond our regulatory reach, it's not a release, so we're not dealing with that. But the drinking water elements, absolutely, and there are some limited areas where there have been significant air releases that have resulted in deposition. This is up in New Hampshire, contamination of soil and drinking water. So the air exposure pathway historically, maybe there was some significance there, but to parse that out from all of those other exposures is probably not possible.
So I guess in light of that, is DP going to be telling the regulated community to focus on GW1 areas, which is something I think a lot of us commented upon that, and I think Wendy talked about last time that in terms of relative contribution to exposure and risk, drinking water is really the number one focus. So are we going to be able to just limit our risk evaluation on the exposure of concern for release-related impacts? And as a corollary, I would still just remind people, risk assessment is a hypothetical construct. It is not a substitute for epidemiological study or a health study. We're making a number of very upper bounds, sometimes exceedingly unrealistic, conservative assumptions to be protected. So I just don't want to get to a point where we're coming up with a risk that's way beyond even a reasonable maximum exposure scenario. So that's another thing that sort of concerns me with us doing our own research projects and coming up with toxicity values and then plugging those into a very conservative construct that wasn't really meant to study health effects per se.
So we could probably discuss for hours the relative conservativeness of the risk assessment and toxicology process. I would disagree with significant amounts of what you just said. But yes, I think in terms of focusing attention on GW1 areas where there could be a drinking water pathway related exposure, I think that makes sense in terms of how we're integrating that into the revisions. I don't know if you comment on that.
As we had heard, and we think that it's a good idea that for the fact sheet focuses on kind of the level of effort and where we expect or where we hope that people will look for PFAS because it is an additional analysis. It's the lab capacity is getting better. So it's where we want people to focus, where we want people to look, and that's I think the fact sheet will reflect that our greatest concern are for exposures in GW1 areas. So there are a variety of things that would lead an LSP to conclude that, I should be looking for PFAS in this context. And one of them where we would have put additional weight would be in GW1 areas. And if it's not in a GW1 area, then we will not say never look for it, because there are going to be situations where, say, you're dewatering soil and you're creating exposure and you're going into a stream or something where, we don't want, if it's PFAS, we don't want to create different exposures, but those are more unique situations. So I think the fact sheet will reflect that GW1 focus.
Oh, Nancy wants to say. Just a couple.
Oh, wait.
Okay, just a couple of points. First, on soil, preliminary looks at soil exposures does make it look like that's much lower risk than groundwater, but remember, we haven't done the analysis to see what levels would be of concern for leaching into groundwater yet, and that's probably going to be a driving factor for soil PFAS analyses at sites. The other thing that I wanted to mention, just to put sort of the risks into perspective, we're all carrying around a body burden, a fairly high body burden of PFAS compounds, levels that actually probably are causing harm to some people. So when we talk about, really tiny exposures and uncertainty, really there's no uncertainty about the fact that we're already at risk levels, and any small exposure just adds into that. So I wouldn't minimize the problem of small exposures and the uncertainties about the risk assessment for that reason. Mark, you might disagree with that, I don't know.
No, I would agree with that. All right, just note here on conservativeness, the EPA Health Advisory said the other states that have looked at this more closely using recent data are coming up with considerably lower values. We are sticking with the 70 for right now. We think it's within the range, and it's certainly not.
I have a question. I don't know if I need a microphone, but I have a question about the. I have a question, a few comments about the analytical methods. EPA is definitely frowns upon modifying their drinking water methods at all. From many environmental chemists' point of view, mine included, the method that EPA puts forth is not the most accurate, precise, best method for this analysis. Isotope dilution is a better method. Would DEP accept isotope dilution method changes to the EPA method to look at drinking water on the sites that we're evaluating?
The complexity is for the drinking water program, they do really sort of require the methodologies to be used. So if we're linking back to the drinking water issue, then we would prefer the EPA 537 method. Having said that, for a waste site cleanup, site assessment process, those other methods provided the appropriate QA/QC information is provided and made available, I think would be appropriate and would be acceptable.
Yeah, I think when Mark said that it links back to drinking water issues, to be very specific, the DEP drinking water program, which regulates public water supplies. So it's more, part of the divide is public water supplies where there are very clear and inflexible, mandated. I mean, they do what they do. And that is their program, and they have, they have requirements for what methods that they use. So if you are dealing with a public water supply that may be related to a 21E site, but is also a public water supply regulated by 310 CMR 22, then there are requirements for the use of specific analytical methods. That said, if you are dealing with drinking water that is a private well, which is not regulated by that program, and is only a 21E site, then the performance standards that are generally applicable under the MCP would apply. The data has to be of known and usable quality, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I think in our, maybe by kind of site assessment versus drinking water, it may become complex, and since a lot of our sites are related to public water supplies, it may default to that method. But there is a question.
And, the methodology, development, and toxicity information, it is all rapidly developing. It's a process. EPA is working on developing methods that would be applicable for soils. We've been working with FDA on methods applicable for food items. It's just a lot of stuff happening. Tox data is indicated there's all these EHS studies. EPA's move towards trying to use structure-activity relationships and in vitro toxicity information in place of to supplement the animal studies. And when you've got 3,000 chemicals, with new ones being generated, created, basically on a weekly basis, there's no hope of doing 2-year animal studies on all of those. It'll never happen. We really have to be able to extrapolate information in whatever deal with those. Yes?
One last thing. One thing that we're always struggling with in this type of work, in this case example, we have many indoor airs and other, is occurrence. What is a release and what is occurrence from use of these products. What I really use help with now is what are the studies that are being done related to excretion and wastewater impacts. Cape Cod is a prime example of wastewater is discharged to a GW1 water supply. To what extent is that a contributing factor to any data we might collect from a water supply well at a homeowner's location or a community supply on Cape Cod or anywhere else in the state? Septic systems are a reality. Wastewater discharges to groundwater are a reality. What do we know about that source?
There's a lot of information about those sources. We've not dived in to look at those, but I think those are one really good questions.
Because those are the kinds of things we'll need to bring to bear when we go about assessing groundwater, whether it be a homeowner's well next to a AFFF release at a firehouse. Is there a septic system a contributing factor, and to what extent can we ferret that out and tease it out and put it aside?
In some ways, it's very, like with that, it's very similar to 1,4-dioxane. And, we've seen things like sampling, the effluent from wastewater treatment plants or from septic systems in order to do that on a case-by-case basis. And also, I think we'll eventually see broader studies like we have seen for 1,4-dioxane on PFAS in, ambient groundwater in locations like that.
But I'm thinking about this sort of UCMR type study that is based on sources as opposed to exposure points.
All right, thank you, everyone. And any other feedback or welcome to hear from you. Thanks.
Bathroom break time. Okay. Wow.
You should have watched Andrew.
No, Paul usually has candy. I think he has some in the back. Thank you for having me again. I was just going back to see when was the last time I talked to you about this information. Last time I was here, we were talking about adaptation, climate resiliency, and this time I'm going to do a deep dive and try to cover a bunch of topics on clean energy and what's going on in the state, what your kind of connection to that would be, what I'd like it to be, where I think there's opportunity. So the last time was really May. There was a lot going on last May 2016. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background in the clean energy industry, what's going on, what we're doing with landfill and brownfield sites in the state, the new solar legislation that's coming up, renewable thermal, there's been movement in that. That's been kind of quiet for 2 years. And then the clean energy legislation that came out last year has a host of different topics. I think there's an intersection nexus to the work that we do, and I'm hoping there's opportunities there as well. Don't know if I'll get through all these topics, but let's get started. The Clean Energy Industry Report came out from MassDEP last year. There's the link to it there, and we'll have these slides posted. But as you can see, clean energy is providing 150,000 people with employment. 63% of those are in the solar industry. That amounts to about 14 or 15,000 folks that are building solar in the state. We're number one in energy efficiency. It's $11.8 billion industry, and it goes on and on. So it's been a really tremendous benefit to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. On a national level, solar provides more jobs to the nation than does fossil fuels. You can see the numbers right there, pretty impressive. You've probably heard about this. It's been touted a lot in the press recently, especially with the changes in the way the country's going politically. I want to give a shout out to New Bedford and Mayor Mitchell, who went to Congress this year and testified on behalf of the cuts to EPA, and the focus of this a little bit was the success stories that they've been having with the renewable energy development. This is Sullivan's Ledge. It's a Superfund site down in New Bedford. It's been a tremendous benefit to the community, and it's the vision that the community has, which is great and something that he shared in Washington, D.C. Back again to what our goals initially in the state of Massachusetts for building solar. If you remember back in 2012, we were going to try to build 50 megawatts of solar on contaminated land and 75 on landfills. Last time I spoke with you, we had 26 projects. We now have 36 projects on contaminated lands in Massachusetts. 16 are still under development. Kind of sort of where they are. I don't think that map's been updated. But we're having tremendous success, and we hope to continue that. It amounts to 104 megawatts. That's the impressive number. Of course, we've obviously exceeded our goal, and our goal was up to 2020. So, landfills, same thing, 2,007 megawatts. This is really, really impressive. I think I tweeted out on this that Massachusetts is just way far ahead of the rest of the country. I was at a meeting recently in DC where the state of New York, which has an impressive renewable energy goal, is actually using verbatim the permitting process and the tools that we use to put solar on landfills to get theirs kind of jump started in that state. So kudos really to our solid waste folks and all the people that are doing that work. And again, Repowering America's Land Initiative keeps track of what's going on across the nation. And we still have the most projects of any other state, 75, and you know that's a lot less than what I've been showing you in our data. You can see where those projects are located across the country. They continue to push other states to do similar things. We continue to be the nation's leader in this effort. Back last year, it was all well and good and everything was going great until a couple things happened. Our SY2 program, its goals were met. We were trying to build out 1,600 megawatts of solar, 400 initially, 1,200 later, and it all came in and was filled up by February of last year. And that created a problem, and that was an incentive that the state offered. Secondly, net metering caps were met. They were met really early on. This is what I'm posting there is the 120,000 kilowatts that were not able to go into the system because of those caps being met. We've talked about this in May. The legislature had to go out and pass the Solar Act to keep the momentum going, to keep building this clean energy economy in the state. And several things came out. What came out was they raised the caps, 7% and 8% respectively for private and public projects. And then you can see they gradually wanted us to transition the solar incentive program to a different type of program, one that wasn't so heavily subsidized, but would still keep the business going. Next generation solar. In any event, here's the solar programs that, over the years we've been talking about. 2009, the first one really, it was a 400 megawatt goal. By 2020, we wanted to go 400 megawatts of solar. We have just about that much on contaminated landfills alone. Second, after that was filled up in 2013, way ahead of schedule, we came out with 1,200 megawatts, which started to really focus on where we actually install these locations and to be cognizant of the environmental impact we were having. In the first program, everyone was screaming and yelling about all the trees being cut and the green spaces being used. So we put brownfields and landfills favorability in SREC 2. That program got filled up in 2016, as I mentioned, and now we're on to what we're going to call a SMART program, the Solar Massachusetts Renewable Target. That's the new program. That's going to be coming out hopefully next year sometime. The anticipated date is March of 2018. More likely it's July or September is what most developers and consultants think, but we'll have to wait and see. And I'll talk a little bit about it in depth. In the interim, DOER is allowing for solar projects to be developed. There's no goal on what megawatt they're looking at. We're calling it an extension of SREC 2. The incentive has been decreased, but it still exists and folks can still do projects. And we're getting some applicants in right now who are pretty sure that they're going to get their projects done by next March, which is excited to know that we have activity in SREC 2 and we have 1,600 megawatts yet to be built coming up starting next year. So we just talked about the transition. So if any of you are working on a project, your SREC factor continues to decrease. Under SREC 2 is 80%, it's down to 55%. And that will be until the new program is in place. And like I said, that date might shift. Sadly, the net metering caps are already starting to be met again, even though they were raised. And this is the National Grid territory. What we're waiting to see, there's about 3 pieces of legislation pending, some to eliminate caps entirely, some to increase them 13%. The new solar incentive program is meant to do something about net metering caps without raising the caps. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But it is an issue, and it is an issue for developers, of course. We keep going back to this, it seems like every couple of years. This is DOER's final program design for the SMART program. They actually had 2 programs. They released the one in September of 2016. This is the latest iteration of that came out in January 2017. There's many nuances to this program. It's very complicated. I wanted to go through some of the things that I felt would interest you or actually touch you in a way that you would work with these projects and these sites. A lot of it's financial. It's a 1,600 megawatt program. It's a declining block program. We are no longer going to have SRECs. We're going to have a feed-in tariff from the utility that's going to pay basically pay the incentive. The blocks they're 200 megawatt blocks, and in each block there'll be a decrease in that incentive each time you get in. So there's going to be, before projects like this come in and they get all the same SREC, and now we're going to have to kind of see who tries to get into what block when. The reason for this is because the price of solar installations continue to decrease, and the state wants to be in line with that. Instead of giving huge incentives, they want to wean us off incentives. The base rate that everybody will get, it's based on the size of the projects. You can see on the left-hand column the different sizes, the largest being at the bottom, the 5 megawatt projects. Those will get about 14 cents. It's estimated, we don't know yet, it'll depend on how the program gets put together. 14 or 15 for those larger projects. And then after that, you'll be able to put an adder on to your project size. And what I've indicated is that brownfields are staying in this program. They will be incentivized by 3 cents, landfill by 4. I wish that was larger. We'll see if I can get it larger. The reason why landfills are getting incentivized more is because the utility interconnections cost so much. So we'll see. If you can do a project for me, that's community shared solar on a brownfield, large scale, that would be great. It's gonna, your all-in costs are gonna, or incentive would be really beneficial. The other thing that I was gonna talk about today is solar energy storage. Energy storage is going to be incentivized too, and it is in this program. It'll be a formula, so we don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to encourage storage with solar. And then I've indicated that there will be a subtractor, and I'll explain that. So everything's going to change for brownfield. It's going to be exactly the same as you're used to doing it in the SREC 2 program. So nothing will change there, so that's good to know. I wanted to mention in the program that DOER had in September. Oh, I've got to hurry up.
No, you wanted to.
Oh, yeah. This program came out in September, and how it originally was going to work, it was great for brownfield landfill because you could only do a project there, no green space. And all of these properties were off limits, and it was based on GIS layers. Well, between September and January, a lot of developers looked at all these GIS layers and said, wow, there's nowhere I can do any solar projects in the state. Talked to DOER about it, decided that we wouldn't be that restrictive in how we were able to do projects. We would allow for projects to be on green fields or open space. So this exercise of GIS was done, and what it amounted to was you get a base rate, you get adders for these type of projects, canopy solar. I wish canopy solar was in a different category, but it's not. And then if you're on commercial industrial zone property that's been previously developed, you get the base rate. If it hasn't been previously developed, it's zoned that way, you're going to get a subtractor. And if it's same thing, if it's ground mounted, not CNI, you're going to get an even bigger subtractor. So you're going to actually be able to do projects on green fields. It's just going to be penalized for doing it. Get more money up here, less here. This is going to be very complicated to figure out. I think it's going to be town by town zoning. I don't know if we really know how this is going to work out in the end, but I can imagine questions to you folks as you're working on some of these projects, hopefully. These were the land use categories that DOER, which I just showed you on that other thing. And what's important to note is that these three categories right here, the ground mounted on CNI, they're all going to need to follow these land use performance standards that are really been created by the Department of Agriculture. There's going to be no stripping of soil. There's going to be a lot of restrictions to the way that these projects can be developed as well, keeping the natural environment as paramount for the way the projects can be developed. So there's a lot more to this program. There's a lot about financing. There's a lot of different ways to move money around with credits and things like that. If you're interested, you go to DOER's website. Every hearing has been taped. You can listen to what they're saying clearly, 50 slides as well. Emergency regulations were recently filed this month, and there is a public hearing at MassDEP here in Boston on July 11th if you're interested. It's always a cast of thousands for these things, and then I've given you a link if you're interested. Already? Okay. You're only going to hear about a few things. Renewable thermal. I said the last 2 years, we went out with the LSPs in 2015 to do training. But we really thought that ground source heat pumps, a way of obtaining heating and cooling for buildings, might be an opportunity for the LSPs to engage in, either as heating for treatment processes and remediation, or just standard heating and cooling for buildings and or retrofits for the ones that are already been installed. The key was the incentives, and at the time, ground source heat pumps weren't incentivized by the state. They weren't in the APS, the alternative portfolios, so they weren't getting a REC. Like solar got an SREC, they would get a REC. We would kind of call it an ACRE or something else, we know what they ended up calling it. And the federal government, of course, had programs that were expiring, and believe it or not, the residential 30% tax credit expired in 2015 Congress, and now we're pretty clear that it won't be reauthorized. But in any event, there was a draft of 2014, the new regs for the APS with the incentive for ground source heat pumps just came out again this month. There's a public comment if you're interested, July 14th. And I know that what the state was trying to do is, because we lost our incentives from the federal government, they really try to ratchet up what the state could offer for these technologies to keep them in line with what people might have been used to be getting with the federal incentives. So there is going to be a push by the state to install these. And MassDEP has always had, and this really came out of our LSP training, there was no commercial ground source heat pump program, no way to get grants from the state for feasibility studies and installation and engineering and such. So they launched a commercial program in 2016. We still didn't have the APS out. They updated again this year. They'll be considering what the APS changes have. But it's a $30 million program, and it's not necessarily been tapped into as much, and I was kind of hoping we would have more synergy with you folks, whether that be the buildings you're working on or remediation you're doing or what, or even if you're just engaged in those type of projects with a different hat on. Know that there's a big grant program out there that is open over at MassDEP. I guess let's see how far I get. The Act to Promote Energy Diversity came out soon after the Solar Act, so they split them up. This is the 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind that you hear about off of Martha's Vineyard, or the Quebec hydropower that you're hearing about. But what else was in here was an energy storage. These are small pieces. Property assessed clean energy, small hydro. Storage, what's great about that is there's a goal of 600 megawatts for this state to build out. They want to build it into all the grant programs and all of our APSs, and including, like I mentioned, the Solar Smart program, so that we can tap into it. It's advanced energy storage. This is more like batteries that you're hearing about, where Tesla has the power walls for your cars and for your homes and that kind of thing. You can see that storage there's only 500 megawatts in the entire country. This is going to allow for us to generate power and then put it back on the grid during peak demand times. It's going to allow us to stabilize renewable energy's interaction with the grid and allow us to be more resilient as we start thinking about climate change effects and the lack of power in some situations. The state of Massachusetts is only 23rd in solar storage. Of course, California is first. We have a limited amount of projects across the state, so there's a big effort to build out this technology. And these are some of the recommendations where they want to put it. But where they want to get to is there's a resilient service stations challenge now going on at MassDEP. And what this is all about is trying to make gas stations, service stations along evacuation routes in the state be resilient from climate change effects. In other words, be able to have power to run facilities when there isn't, so that people can obtain gas, can obtain food, and as such. What we asked for MassDEP to consider was to include a consideration of our remedial systems that are running at these locations. We know that it wouldn't be the perfect scenario if the system was being used to protect the groundwater drinking water supply. Maybe it would. If it's on evacuation route, maybe it wasn't. But this at least gets us a foot in and allows us to tap into this program and see if there's any overlap and we can keep our systems running. Some interesting examples of what's being done already is the city of Boston installed solar at its refueling stations to keep its city running in the event of climate change impacts, extreme storms, flooding. BP installed solar PV on its canopies over its fueling stations, starting to run on renewable energy. This was done internationally, and MassDEP would like to see these models implemented in the state of Massachusetts. Evacuation routes has solar panels and batteries on them. These are all things that you could be thinking about in the remedial systems that you have online, whether the APM systems or the groundwater pumpetry systems that are working to address imminent hazards, substantially reduced migration considerations, and things as such, so that we can keep them operational in extreme storm events. And what this challenge is looking for right now is just really funding to do. It's a concept paper. How do you think this could work out for you? There's a bunch of different folks that have expressed an interest in them. Most of them are solar and renewable energy developers. Right now they're providing a little bit of funding just for this, about $75,000 a project. These sponsors are due in July, if you're interested. What was suggested to me, and I'll suggest to you, is these folks that have expressed interest. I don't know if that makes it going to work, but you can go on MassDEP's website. You can see who those folks are, the municipalities, like I said, they're renewable energy developers, and talk to them, engage with them, see if there's a way that you can connect with them and make a proposal together. This would be great for us as we start looking at climate change adaptation and what we're going to do to address that. Okay, I'll just do this. Property assessed clean energy for commercial buildings. This program is also was in the energy bill, and it's going to be run jointly by Mass Development and Department of Energy Resources. It's being developed right now. This is a mechanism to allow for you to map. I remember we talked about this. This Connecticut is doing something similar where you will be able to finance through your taxes your energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements to your physical structures. And it's commercial buildings, industrial buildings, multifamily buildings, and it's these type of upgrades. One thing about this is the individual municipalities have to opt into case by voting, and so it's going to be town by town. So maybe Michelle is something you guys want to think about. There's nothing out yet. I've been talking with DOER because what I want is it's great for lead development. By the way, we're the #1 lead certified space station. It's great for that to make these buildings energy efficient, renewable, and I think that's the intent. But the other thing is, can we consider, active remedial systems and their associated equipment? Can that be covered under PACE? DOER is looking into it. They're talking with me about it, so we'll see, and that would be really cool too if you guys could get some funding that way. So I'm still waiting to see how that's all going to play out at Mass DOER. So stay tuned for that. I don't know if you go to those meetings or whatever. Okay. We'll talk about hydro next time. That one's probably the least likely, but still exciting nonetheless. Thank you.
Keep up the good work. I love seeing those solar along the MassDEP.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Pelto, and I coordinate the Natural Resource Damages Program on behalf of the Secretary, who is the trustee of Natural Resources. And the day-to-day operations are located right here in the Bureau Waste Site Cleanup. And I just wanted to give you a little update and a sense of what's been happening. Basically covering just two main topics. Let you know who within DEP is working in what part of the state, and also give you some restoration highlights from the past couple of years. We've had active trustee councils up and running for many years for various cases around the state, from the South Coast to the Berkshires to the Cape. Nyanza is in the Sudbury Aspect Concord watershed. The others are relatively self-explanatory in terms of where they are around the state. Each trustee council has a primary representative and an alternate, as well as a legal advisor and in some cases technical advisors. And we operate on these cases in cooperation with our federal trustee agencies, usually either U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or both. We have some new councils that are up and coming. We negotiated with our Office of General Counsel a model memorandum of agreement to proceed with these recently settled cases, proceed into planning and then implementing restoration. Blackburn and Union is in our southeast region, that is in Walpole, in the upper Neponset watershed. Sutton Brook is in Tewksbury in the Shawshene watershed, northeast region, and Industraplex in Woburn, also in the northeast region in the Aberjona subwatershed of the Mystic. And each of them involve ecological resources, but both Blackburn and Union and Sutton Brook also involve restoration of groundwater resources, which usually involves protecting aquifer lands, but can also include increasing clean recharge to aquifers, keeping water local, a lot of issues that many municipalities are facing. And these will be up and running this year, working with the public to identify projects. Speaking of working with the public, over the past 2 years, we have been engaged with the public on a couple of items. One, some initial outreach for Blackburn and Union, where we are starting to identify potential restoration projects with the town and with other stakeholders, as well as some amendments to some restoration plans that we had prepared in the past where either an additional project was identified or additional detail relative to previously selected projects was shared with the public. When we settle a natural resource damages case under both federal and state law, we are required to prepare for public review and comment a restoration plan, and this also serves as an environmental assessment under the National Environmental Policy Act. And that, in Massachusetts, involves a great deal of public process because of the type of state that we are and the type of stakeholders that we have engaged. So we actually often work very early on to identify restoration projects. We don't like to draft a plan and just say, here, what do you think? Some highlights. One is for a case that was settled under state law with only the Commonwealth as the trustee, the secretary. That was in the Upper Mystic, and that related to a fuel oil spill that impacted the Mystic River in Arlington and Medford. And we were able to combine a natural resource damage settlement with some penalty funds to fund two projects in the city of Medford and the town of Arlington to improve the riparian corridor, but also improve water quality. And I'll actually be going out later this afternoon to Arlington, where there's going to be an important update relative to that implementation of that project. But both of these are underway with the use of those settlement and penalty funds. Yesterday, I was in the town of Marion with the federal trustee agencies celebrating the completion of the Bird Island restoration, which was one of the very first projects identified by that trustee council back in 2000 or in the 1990s. There are two islands in Buzzards Bay that support the majority of the population of the Northeast's endangered terns, roseate terns, which are endangered, and common terns, which are a species of special concern, and they co-nest together. And this island had previously a stone revetment that was deteriorating. The Army Corps, under its restoration authority, was the project lead on repairing that revetment. But when that project first started, it was simply repair the revetment, improve the nesting habitat. By the time it was implemented, we had included, echoing some of Tom's presentation, predictions for sea level rise to make sure that this had a 50-year design life and was going to be providing habitat for terns. This was right after completion. The island is revegetating also, and I don't have a picture, but yesterday, and I have been out to the islands, we provide what look like little tents for the terns as additional nesting and hiding from predator areas. They're like little wooden boxes that they nest in. Well, gulls, actually. Gulls are a predator. But you're right, land-based predators, not so much. Some other restoration highlights. I want to acknowledge in New Bedford, the Palmer's Island Trail improvements. It's wonderful to have this gem of a resource in the Inner Harbor receive funds not only from Bouchard, but also from the New Bedford Harbor Settlement to help make that not only increase its habitat value, but increase the amenities for the public to use that resource that is so near to them. A couple others, Nascatucket Bay State Reservation Trail improvements, as well as universal access to a couple of beaches along the bay by our sister agency, Department of Conservation and Recreation. On the left, you see what are called Moby mats, which allow folks in wheelchairs to access the beach and the shore. And this was literally right after it was put in, and according to DCR, the gentleman in the wheelchair said, "It's about blank time." So he's very pleased. On the right are folks putting oyster shells in the Buzzards Bay in Fairhaven, which will serve as nesting habitat for the larvae that are then introduced as part of the oyster restoration. 2 of the many injuries that occurred from this spill involved injury to shellfish and habitat, as well as injury to shoreline, which included the habitat, but also the use by the public. So that's why both of these projects, some of our projects actually involve public access improvements. Going a little inland, I mentioned Nyanza is in the Sudbury, Alphabet, and Concord watershed. Paul attended the event to celebrate the improvement of the Red Maple Trail, which is on the bottom left, which goes through some floodplain forest, as well as has a viewing platform overlooking the river and its wetlands. It's also designed in many of its length to be universally accessible. We've also been working with folks to control the water chestnuts, which is an invasive aquatic plant, which was primarily proposed by the public because it was impeding recreational use. But it turns out, through consultation with Mass Wildlife, they also were of the opinion that it was outcompeting the native wild rice populations along the river that the waterfowl depend on. So it really is intended to benefit both people and wildlife. And we do have a wild rice restoration effort that will follow the chestnut removal process. I mentioned that Hoyle Coal Tar, we went out for an amendment. That's because when we removed the Amethyst, the first dam on Amethyst Brook, we discovered in the impounded sediment a dam that nobody even knew was there, even the local historical society. A timber dam that actually ended up being, according to the folks who did the field archaeology historical documentation, one of the most interesting sites they've ever been to. A piece of the dam is actually left in place interpretively, but it's been fully documented. It was removed. Recently, I had the pleasure of joining fellows, environmental professionals from Uruguay, Peru, and Mexico, who were in Massachusetts for about a month. Took them out to the site to get a sense of the restoration project, but also the monitoring that's been taking place there. And those folks are on the right. Gamely Crossing, the Amethyst Brook below the first dam that was removed, so they could go upstream and look at the second one. And finally, out of the Berkshires and the Housatonic settlement, the past couple of years have been focused on the land acquisition to conserve habitat component, which was the focus of the third round of funding. And over 300 acres has already been acquired. We are evaluating an additional several hundred acres of habitat for acquisition. Also, one of the key projects from a prior round was completed, and that was restoration of 10 acres of floodplain forest, as well as control of invasive species in Bartholomew's Cobble, which is a property owned and managed by the trustees of reservations. And what was interesting, there's several interesting things. One, there was tremendous volunteer involvement in planting the trees. Number two, most of the trees are from the local seed stock. The organization Project Native actually collected seeds from the trees in the floodplain forests that already exist. And the third is that the farmer who is just down on the next property originally cleared all these trees and thinks we're insane for replanting them because it took him so long to take them all out in the first place. But it's been really a tremendous project and a tremendous example of monitoring to demonstrate the benefits that we hope to see through a restoration, which is certainly something that the trustees are obligated to do is oversight monitoring. And that wraps it up. Thank you all so much.
Special thanks to Karen and Tom for racing through the presentation so we could get to the audience participation part of today's program. So mostly what I want to do with the time remaining, and Brian and I wanted to talk about MCP requirements related to temporary solutions and the associated requirements that go with them, because of it's something that we had several had identified several potential reg changes, and I think it would be helpful if we looked at them as they relate to one another, and also get your experience in dealing with temporary solution sites as just kind of a way to touch base on how these sites are working, what isn't working. Before I do that, I was going to quickly just talk about the IPM compliance, which is something that I covered at the LSP training at the end of May, only because we have been talking in this group about that on an ongoing basis, but I don't think the latest message that went out on that was something we talked about here. So I just wanted to only spend 2 minutes on this, but you know that we've been working trying to get those folks that have registered their telemetry systems to make sure that they're communicating with the department, and we've been had a kind of a concerted effort to be in contact with them and hear back from them. And so over time, I think this is over the since January of 2016, we've seen some improvement, and we've also seen more systems continuing to register. So the universe of sites with telemetry has grown, and the compliance is somewhat improved, but it is still not at a great level with 64% of the registered systems actually working the way we want them to be. So this is the yeah.
Can you go back one slide? I guess what's the difference between the red line and the blue line?
The red line is that they have a complete registration in numbers, and then the blue line is percentage-wise of the universe. And this has the same numbers. There are 72 sites involved, 147 devices, because there are multiple devices at some sites, multiple buildings usually. So 91 devices are good, they're operating properly. 5 devices that were installed are no longer necessary. They demonstrated it's no longer necessary to keep them in place. So that those 2 are fine, but we do have this universe here of devices where the 30 or so where they've done some work to try to get them into compliance, but they haven't been successful yet. And another 21 where we're really getting no recognizable notification from them. So that's the focus of, the remaining ones we're trying to get into compliance. And so I wanted to let everyone know that we have this effort underway now to conduct audits. We're either doing screening paper audits or level 2 audits where we're doing a site inspection, issuing NOMs for telemetry devices that aren't functioning properly, where we haven't had a response to date from the PRP, or we've had some response, but it's been a long period of time, and we haven't yet gotten to the point where it's functioning properly. And within 90 days of issuing those NOMs, we're expecting a shutdown and restart test to be conducted. And if successful, then that situation has been addressed, but if not, the next step would be to invalidate the permanent solutions and temporary solutions and remedy operation status that are relying on these systems. So I know that's bad news, but I just want people to be aware of that. So moving on now, today we wanted to talk about the temporary solution requirements, but we have another MCP amendments related discussion tomorrow at 10 o'clock that Nancy Bettinger will be leading, which is on exposure point concentrations. Hopefully you saw that. That information was in the email about this meeting. So I just want to run through some background information before we get to going through some of the questions that we wanted to hear from you about. This area of the regs, temporary solutions and the related requirements has been changed and revised over time, but I think has suffered from the fact that it really has never been the focus too much of the changes. So incidental changes
were made to these provisions as a result of something else going on somewhere else in the regulation. And as a result, there are provisions that are inconsistent. There are provisions that don't really speak directly to what is required. And you can see that the inconsistency or the lack of clarity in the regulations has also resulted in people not necessarily handling these sites in the same way in terms of compliance. And it relates to whether or not you have to get a tier classification extension and at what point, whether or not status reports and remedial monitoring reports are required, given the work that you're doing. That 5-year periodic review that's required for temporary solutions where no permanent solution is feasible. And then if you have reached a temporary solution, what is the deadline for the next step or attempting to get to a permanent solution in those cases where you say a permanent solution is feasible? That's kind of left unaddressed in the regulations. You know, we have that one section in 500 that says you need a phase 2 by, I think it's 2 years from tier classification, and phase 3 and phase 4. But for those sites that get to a temporary solution where it is feasible to get to a permanent solution, we don't say anything about how much time they have to do that. So those are some of the areas that we want to clarify. And I think I've said this, is eliminate inconsistency, clarify, and then make the requirements, particularly with respect to status reports and remedial monitoring reports, match the kind of work that's going on at the site. I'm not going to spend any time on this. I have this as a reference in case people want to know where things happen, but we'll skip over that for now. So some of the examples of where we say different things in the regs. 561B, we say that for comprehensive response actions at a disposal site, you need tier classification extension. So to do anything in the 800, you need a valid tier classification section to do anything in the 800 section. So that would include phase 2 through phase 5. 1055B, you need a valid tier classification if you have one of those types of temporary solutions where a permanent solution is feasible. 1067.7, this is the post-permanent solution, post-temporary solution provisions of when those circumstances where you may need to submit a RAM plan or a phase 4 plan to do work. In that case, it says where, and it stresses remedial actions are conducted, you need a valid tier classification for any type of temporary solution. And then there's this provision, 567A, that seems to say you don't need a tier classification extension in the case of a temporary solution. I think this is a holdover from an earlier era in the regs where you had temporary solution and this really nothing active was going to be going on at the site. We treated those similar to remedy operation status where you didn't need to keep a tier classification in status valid. So some of those provisions emphasize that you need a valid tier classification if you're doing if you're doing remedial measures or something active operation and maintenance. I think one of them used that. Which one uses that, Brian? Maybe you haven't come to it. Anyways, they use the different terms, active operation and maintenance or remedial system. So the other thing to look at are the definitions of those terms. Active operation and maintenance covering active remedial system, IPMs, and active remedial monitoring program, which would include monitored natural attenuation, application of remedial additives. Oh, so this is the one that says anytime you're doing active operation and maintenance of a remedial action, you are required to submit status reports on a 6-month basis, as well as remedial monitoring reports. So that's kind of a sum up of the different requirements and where they stand. Oh, one more, periodic review. This is for where temporary solutions, where a permanent solution is not feasible. You're required to do a periodic review every 5 years. That includes the definitive and enterprising steps and what you've done lately to address the site. So when we, just a couple of data runs that shows what's actually happening, and you can see the inconsistency in how people are addressing this. So for temporary solutions in the category where permanent solution is not feasible, there are 523 of those. Most of them do not have a valid tier classification. And some of them are submitting status reports. So we have seen a status report in the last 2 years. In fact, so most of them are not submitting status reports, but some are. Where permanent solution is feasible, again, the majority of those sites don't have a valid tier classification. And they're submitting more status reports in that case. Did I summarize that? Periodic reviews. Surprisingly, there are sites that are where periodic reviews are supposed to be done that aren't doing those as well. And I would say this is one of the requirements that I think is pretty clear. One thing that's not clear is whether periodic reviews are required for both types of temporary solutions. I think the regs should be read that they're only required in the permanent solution not feasible category. But still, in that permanent solution not feasible category, there's a good percentage of cases where we're not seeing those periodic reviews every 5 years.
And Liz, are the ones who aren't doing the status reports also the ones that are not doing the 5-year periodic review? Like, is it a consistent pattern of?
Did we look at that?
We didn't really look at that, but I would say no. I saw people doing status reports and not the 5-year review.
And vice versa.
Are they two different things?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, but shouldn't they be separate? Considering status reports for every 5 years?
Yeah. Can you clarify that? I mean, my understanding is if you are doing 5-year reviews because it's a temporary solution and it's not feasible, you don't need to do 6-month status reports.
That could be the case in the current, if you're not doing remedial actions.
Right. Depends why.
Yeah. Right.
But if you're doing remedial action, why have you been?
Well,
the permanent solution is feasible.
Not necessarily.
No. So no, that's a good thing to highlight because you could be doing remedial actions just to maintain your temporary solution. So we have some of those. Similarly with remedial monitoring reports, the takeaway here is just it's all over the place. Not and I think the regs in part can take credit for being confusing, and that might be part of it. But even in the periodic review case, I think that reg is fairly clear, and we have people not doing that work as well. So where do we want to go with this? I have one recommendation, and that is I would like the tier classification remaining valid issue to become a non-issue. I just think I would just like it to always be valid. And if we can roll it into other submittals that are being done anyway, then that would be helpful. So one option, for example, in the case of temporary solution where a permanent solution is not feasible, we could have them extend their tier classification on a two-year basis like all sites, or we could make that part of the 5-year periodic review. But that way we will no longer be making calls on, well, you need a valid tier classification because you're doing remedial action and what you're doing sounds just like groundwater monitoring and you don't need it. That's just left left to a lot of confusion, and it's just not worth it. So my proposal off the top is we make that just not much of an issue. We make that pretty straightforward. The other things to focus on, and we were trying to get to with the questions, is the different kinds of activities that are occurring at these sites, and what kind of standard reporting should be done in terms of status reports and remedial monitoring reports, and what should be the basis for that. Maybe we just take these questions, people can weigh in on them. We try to get through all of them, and they're all kind of directed at different issues and not that are related to the various requirements. But I
guess before you drill down into the questions, isn't there also kind of a bigger point of when something should be a ROS versus when it should be a temporary solution, and clarity and clarity to that?
Well, that I'm not saying that doesn't need clarity, but that is its own topic, I think. Remedy operation status is an option.
Right.
So you don't have to go into remedy operation status. You could exist in phase 5 doing your monitoring and operation monitoring of your remedial system. And then there are the criteria for remedy operation status. So if you need it and you want the benefits of not having to renew your tier classification, that's one of the benefits. But the really biggest benefit is the liability endpoint. I think that's why most people opt to go into remedy operation status. But that has its own sort of sets of criteria, and temporary solutions, usually someone stays in a temporary solution or a post-temporary solution O&M because they don't want to try to meet that, or they don't need it. So that would be why they're not in remedy operation status. Does that sound right too? Did you have another question with that?
No, I just am not. I mean, I understand the difference, but I wonder if there's real clarity on the tactical laws versus the
There is not.
temporary solution.
There is not good
And
clarity.
so that's why I'm just saying
Yeah.
not completely independent.
Yeah.
That I guess maybe clarification on making the decision on which direction to go might influence some of the discussion on some of the rate changes too. So, although they're different, they touch a little bit, so we might want to think about how they touch and use that.
Yeah.
Want answers to all 9, or you just want to do one at a time?
Well, why don't we go quickly, and if no one has much to say on a question, we'll just move on. So question 1. Wait, I'll read the question. What types of actions? Simmer down. What types of actions are completed after a temporary solution to achieve a permanent solution? So this is to give us a flavor for the things that are going on, and so we can think about the appropriate requirements and process, etc. Ned?
So two examples are, it's not at all unusual with a major construction site, when you have plans and a development plan, but that doesn't jive with your MCP clock for the site in a temporary solution. And then once you do construction, you get all, you get the permanent solution. Promptly, and the other obvious one is our water treatment system, where you're just going to work until you get to the closure site.
Yeah, and the construction scenario also brings up the issue of doing RAMs. A lot of these sites are in temporary solution, also doing RAMs, and that has been another area that raises questions. Well, so do I need a tier classification, valid tier classification for that? I think most of the time we say yes, because it's a remedial action. Okay, any other typical temporary solution activities?
A couple, I don't think I need that.
Okay.
Well, obviously monitor natural attenuation, which you described. Monitor natural recovery for surface water bodies, where you're basically cleaner, if the source has been removed and cleaner sediment is replacing impacted sediment, and also thereby reducing surface water concentration, so you can satisfy the temporary solution criteria, but you can't reach a permanent solution yet. So you're continuing to monitor the natural recovery of that, but that's surface water and sediment versus groundwater. And then passive and active venting at BI sites, especially TCE sites, where again you can maybe satisfy the the temporary solution stability criteria. You don't have an imminent hazard, et cetera, but you're not maybe quite at the point where you want to go passive, and you don't have enough monitoring data yet to support that for a permanent solution. But with the system currently running, you can support a temporary solution. So I think BI sites definitely can have those kind of issues.
So that raises, I think, something that's unclear is the definition of active operation and maintenance. That's active remedial systems and active exposure pathway mitigation measures. But there's also passive mitigation measures and status reports and monitoring reports for that. I think that's a gray area as well.
Yeah.
Ellie?
I have a site where the remediation was completed, remedial goals achieved, but we have protracted negotiations with the current and past owner that implementation of AUL is complete. So we're stuck in a temporary solution until we can come to an agreement.
Yeah, so Brian and I were actually looking at that because we were trying to figure out some of these temporary solutions. They said it's a temporary solution. Permanent solution is feasible, but they haven't gone anywhere for a few years. And that turned out, at least in a couple times that we dug into those cases, to be because an AUL was the next step. So there are sites where they're in phase 3, they're not necessarily even going into phase 4 in some cases, and because they have one step identified as the last step, which is getting the AUL implemented.
And we know that, and that goes both ways, because we also have those same sites in as temporary solution without permanent solution, because the determination was, well, we don't know whether we're going to get the AUL, and therefore we don't know that we can have that solution until we solve the AUL.
Yeah, that's interesting. In those cases, are you mostly in the infeasible category or the feasible category?
We've interpreted
The optimistic people are in the feasible category.
We've mostly put that it's infeasible, because you can't, until you get the AUL, if you don't get the AUL, you wouldn't have a permanent solution, and you can't know that you'll get it until you get it.
And then I've got, I think, similar to what Lisa said, but you were talking about surface water, but
And sediment.
or a sediment situation where basically, yeah, you could dredge out the sediment, like basically where your site is, but there'd be deposition from, upstream by as sediment leak. So it's like feasible until the entire water body got
Yeah.
I think there are a universe of temporary solutions that are or were NAPL sites that now I would say a level of probably investigation. It was negotiation with the agency on what the applicable science and policy was. And that was a very specific action taken for a number of sites. Now it's a level of assessment of the current standards that apply to NAPL sites. And is it actually a permanent solution, or what are the feasible actions to take now to achieve a different endpoint?
So those are undergoing more assessment and evaluation, but not necessarily any remedial action.
Could go either way.
Yeah.
But the first comes first and the latter is uncertain.
Complaints from the...
No, that's not a complaint.
Well, no, 'cause we've had comments from online.
Quantum site. So, long-term treatment of underdrains. Buildings are built, they have underdrains to relieve hydrostatic pressures, and the groundwater is contaminated. And it could be either from an upgrading source, as a PPS, or it's the site itself. So they seem to fall into this black hole where they're treated forever to meet whatever discharge criteria were going to surface water, WRA, and so how do these sites close out? And if it was an ongoing thing, are you going to need 6-month status reports forever? These types of sites. I'm not sure where it fits.
Aren't permitted discharges excluded though from MCP requirements? So if that's the only thing, you know, if it's not a release-related condition, I thought a release did not include permitted discharges.
There is a provision that a controlled source can't be exceeding permit discharge requirement.
I'm talking about like otherwise adequately regulated. Is that not-
There's a notification exemption for
permitted discharge. Yeah, it's a tough one.
Notice.
Add it to the list.
Okay, so I think we've hit some of these in answering question 1, but what are barriers to achieving a permanent solution? Anything else that maybe not related to the site, but other factors like
Waiting for rate changes?
TRP issues?
Well, I mean, this isn't, I guess, I was thinking before you put that caveat in, but there's certainly sites that are in GW1 aquifers that it doesn't pose a risk. You have controlled sources, but you have 6 ppb and the MMCL is 5 ppb. So, you know, you have data to show the, source controls are eliminated, the plume is stable, and maybe very slowly decreasing, but you're just not quite there. And this is especially true for things like that it's not even an active drinking water supply, but it's a potential drinking water supply. It's not actually impacting a well, but you're slightly above, an MMCL. So sometimes you play the waiting game and see if you can get down to it, but, that's certainly an obstacle.
I think that's the example I always use for temporary solutions.
There's also some sites that,
It's a common one.
I'm not sure if it's, but there are some sites that really are complicated enough and complex enough, and the investigations are significant enough that they're not done in 6 years, so it may just be to make a regulatory milestone, file a temporary solution, so that you're not trying to delay your phase 2 and phase 3. You get through your phase 3, and you're just doing it to stay in compliance, because you really can't get there.
Right, yeah,
So,
good point.
Access issues have been a problem in some of those sites. Even after going through the process, when asking for assistance, they're not even hazard sites, so to speak, but still unable to close out portions of the site that are on properties.
You're getting all your
I need exercise.
So seconding Steve's access issues and particularly working on service stations, subsequent releases. So now you have a site where you were just about to be done and then somebody had released some project. Now you're waiting for them to clean theirs up so that you can get a permanent solution.
I will echo what Eileen said. There are just some very complicated sites. And at this stage of the site cleanup and assessment process, they're recalcitrant compounds in difficult circumstances and either UCLs or other regulatory triggers. It's, from a technological or an engineering standpoint, it's difficult to get to the permanent solution endpoint.
I want to make, what do we have for time, Brett? I want to make sure we cover a couple of questions in particular, and it has to do with status reports, monitoring reports, and the distinction between monitoring these sites, and it's usually groundwater monitoring, just to say, we've been looking at concentrations over time. Maybe you're not doing what you would call monitored natural attenuation, but you're just keeping tabs on the groundwater concentration, maybe with respect to meeting a standard versus other kinds of monitoring or monitoring as part of a more active remedial program. So one question is what is the appropriate reporting schedule for that information? If it's, and in the case where it's not related to an exposure point concentration or anything that you're monitoring to ensure no substantial hazard. We do have that one reg that says where you're doing remedial action, you need status reports on a 6-month basis in remedial monitoring reports. But we leave unanswered the question about reporting otherwise. Mike?
I think the simple one is, if you're doing annual groundwater monitoring, does it make any sense to submit 6-month status reports? To me,
Or if you're not doing M&A, do you do any
that's the
reporting?
look for
5 years is good enough.
How about annual status reports if you're doing annual monitoring?
that makes sense.
Rather than waiting 5 years for the periodic review for the information to come in.
So that monitoring of itself would be considered active without M&A?
No, not changing the definition of what you're doing, but the reporting of it, reporting of the information to the department. So let's take the case Lisa was describing, where they're just doing groundwater monitoring and they've done everything else and maybe they're monitoring once a year. And if for some reason that's in the permit solution, it's not feasible category, it probably would be, I think. Because permanent solution is feasible, it usually implies something more active is going on. How often should you be?
Wait a minute, just clarify that again. I don't, if you're just basically waiting for your levels to get down, you're saying that's now infeasible?
Well, because I don't know if they're actually going to get down, so I probably would, be concerned about ending.
I mean, that's, but it could be.
It could go either way.
It could go either way.
I think it could.
And then you'd be making a choice whether you want to do a 5-year, just have to do semi-annual reports or 5-year, right?
Well,
you still need the data to
Still need the data.
5-year review.
Just a little aside on why we have those two categories,
Yeah.
because it remains confusing for everyone. But I think the idea of, we used to have that pool of temporary solution sites and didn't have much information about what was there. And we really creating those two categories was sort of to get the PRPs to declare themselves. We are in an active mode. We think we're moving towards a temporary solution versus we don't have an idea of how we're going to get from here to permanent solution. We're more in a holding pattern. So that's why that's there. It creates complexity for us. But let's assume we're sticking with that for the time being. But there are sites that are, they end up in one or the other, and there's some argument about which category. Or it could change.
Well, or like what Matt said, are they being able to get an AUL? Elliot thinks it's
right.
feasible, you just need the AUL. Matt's like, oh, well, I'm never going to get the AUL.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know if it's feasible until.
But I'm just saying that those are both two legitimate interpretations.
Right.
I'm not saying one is correct and the other isn't.
And before we were getting at the answer to if you are monitoring sampling annually, should you be reporting that annually? Any feelings about that?
Versus semi-annually?
Or versus
5 years. I'm just concerned that if you add a year or whatever, it'll just put a burden on it. It'll discourage people from doing a look-see to see maybe I could do something quicker than 5 years. And you're going to have that unintended consequences that people will, if they have a choice of doing nothing and looking at it right before the 5-year review, they'll wait for 5 years if you add another reporting requirement in there. I'd encourage you to do what you're saying. Define what falls into 6-month review. But if you're not doing M&A and you're just doing a look-see to make sure things haven't changed, and maybe you can close it out sooner, the harder you make it, the less likely people will do it, because they're happy with temporary solutions. Many people.
I don't know if I followed that.
Well,
So-
it's a closure point. They understand what a temporary solution is. And
It's
if-
not a closure point, which is one.
But a lot of people, they're comfortable with it, and if their obligation is just to look at it,
Compliance point.
it's a compliance point, 5 years. And you're the LSP, and you say, okay, well, we need to just check things so we can write the report. They'll do it then. If say, there's a transaction going on, and they say, well, maybe, let's go just look and see things have improved for whatever reason. There's not M&A, dilution, it got better. If the state makes it a higher burden, then now you have to. Maybe you have to hire an LSP when maybe you didn't have to. You have to do a report. You start some reporting cycle. What if you do it every 3 years? It just, I think it will discourage people from keeping tabs on their sites when there's an active remediation going on.
I think that gets at one of the questions that I'm curious about, which is question 7. And I'd like, oh, is it, what's it? Okay. If I could get the answer to question 7.
No, project manager.
Forget number 6.
Which is just typically, when, for those sites where you have temporary solution at that point, once you file a temporary solution on average, or is that an ongoing relationship where you're checking in with them? Reminding them, because that is where a lot of sites just fall off. I think some of that was due to the past where temporary solutions really were considered and interpreted as an endpoint. But we're even seeing that with current temporary solutions where in the last 2 years they've reached a temporary solution and then we've received nothing from them.
If you tell a business person that they don't have to do anything for 5 years and you're going to check back with them for 5 years, 5 years equals infinity in business. Period. I mean, anything 5 years out is, we'll talk to you in 5 years if we're still here.
I disagree in the sense that I keep a deadline list and all the temporary solution 5-year dates are on that list, and we give clients status reports monthly, quarterly, depending on what they want. So really, I mean, it's usual in terms of use there. There's some people who have all days calendar and set, and other people are like,
Clients we want to keep.
It really does depend on the.
So that, in other words, it's a convenient point to shed the client.
I agree with the scuttlebutt. It depends on the regulated entity. I'm very much like that and trying to be very active and set reminders, and there are lots of ways to do that. Some of the PRPs are interested and very motivated, and some aren't. And the regulatory process and the requirements, there is a nexus between them and the involvement. There's no question in the experience I've had.
Is there a good understanding of temporary solution versus permanent solution with most clients? Yeah, and one thing I didn't mention as background is one thing that has gone away is any impact on fees. So we did a while back continue to charge the temporary solution fee to all these sites, so it didn't matter whether they were active or not. But that used to be a distinction that's no longer there to keep them moving. Okay, well, thank you. And I know some people wrote, what?
What would you like me to do with the rest of the question?
Right, I know some people wrote their responses, very impressed by that, and I will take your homework and we'll take back those comments, or if you want to submit.
These will be online. These slides will be online.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to provide additional thoughts on any of these questions, email to Liz.
Yeah, that sounds good.
What's the timetable for something to come from this?
Well, we're trying to get the regs drafted this summer, public hearings in the fall, and have them finalized by the end of the calendar year. That's what we told our bosses anyway. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Liz.
You're right. I said
I'm leaving
It's just separating what's actually
Thank you, I will.